Welcome to Education Crossroads, the podcast that sits at the intersection of learning, policy, and our future.
All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to dig into one single really shocking number. It comes from a major analysis of federal education data, and, well, it points to a national crisis that's been hiding in plain sight.
37%. Just let that sit there for a second. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, that's the percentage of fourth graders in the U.S. who can actually read proficiently at their grade level. And believe me, this is not just some number on a spreadsheet. It's the start of a story that has lifelong consequences for millions of kids.
So what does that really mean? What happens when nearly 2/3 of our students are already falling behind by age 9 or 10? That question right there, that's what we're here to figure out today. We're going to unpack what this crisis looks like, who it hurts the most, and maybe most importantly, why it keeps happening.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll define the crisis itself. Then, we'll get into the disparity gap, and it is a huge gap. After that, we'll look at the systems behind these stats, trace the devastating consequences, and finally, look at the urgent call to action that experts are pushing for.
All right, first up, the crisis itself. We're talking about a failure right at the foundation. I mean, this is about the basic ability to read, which, is the cornerstone for all other learning.
Just take a look at this. This chart really lays out the scale of the problem. That little bar on the left, that's our 37% of proficient readers. But look at the bar next to it. That's the other 63%, nearly 2 out of every 3 fourth graders. They just don't have the skills to fully understand the books they're supposed to be learning from. This isn't a small problem. It's the majority experience for kids in America.
But, it gets even more complicated. Because this crisis, it's not hitting everyone the same way. When you dig into the data, you see that the burden is not shared equally at all.
Wow. I mean, just look at these numbers. The rate for white students, 46%, is already way too low. But look at the drop. Proficiency for Hispanic students plummets to 21%. And for black students, it's a shocking 17%. The rate for white students is more than double that of their peers. This isn't just a gap, it's a canyon.
So you got to be asking, why? Why doesn't this gap just stay the same? Why does it actually get worse over time? To get that, we need to talk about a concept from the 80s called the Matthew effect. It's a really key idea for understanding how this all unfolds.
And this quote just nails it. The idea is simple. In reading, kids who start off as good readers tend to read more. They enjoy it, they learn new words, and they get even better. They get richer. But the kids who struggle, they avoid reading, they fall further behind in vocabulary and knowledge, and it gets harder and harder to ever catch up. The poor get poorer. The gap literally grows itself.
Okay, so that brings us to the big question, right? Why? Why do these gaps even exist in the first place, let alone grow? Well, the analysis is pretty clear on this. It's not about blaming kids. It's about failures that are baked right into our educational system.
And what the analysis shows is that it's a whole mess of things all tangled together. You've got ineffective teaching methods, schools that are seriously under-resourced, the quiet impact of implicit bias, and just having lower expectations for some kids, plus the effects of poverty concentrated in certain areas, and not enough support for students learning English. They all feed into each other.
And a lot of this comes down to a huge debate over how we teach reading. On one side, you have what's called the science of reading. It's based on decades of research showing that explicit, systematic phonics works. It's good for all kids, but it is absolutely essential for struggling readers. On the other hand, there's an approach called balanced literacy, which often downplays that systematic phonics. And here's the kicker. Those less effective methods are often used in the most under-resourced schools, which turns the simple act of learning to read into a massive equity issue.
So we've talked about the why. Now let's talk about the so what. What actually happens when a child can't read well? The report card is just the beginning. It kicks off this devastating cascade of consequences that can set the course for their entire life.
And a huge piece of this puzzle is something called the fourth grade reading cliff. Think of it like this. Up until about third grade, you're learning how to read. But from fourth grade on, you have to read to learn. Suddenly, reading is how you learn history, how you understand science, how you even solve math word problems.
And this, right here, this shows you how it all falls apart like dominoes. A student hits that cliff and they struggle. Because they can't read to learn, they start falling behind in, well, everything. That leads to failing classes, maybe getting held back a grade, which then makes them far, far more likely to just drop out of high school altogether.
Let that sink in for a second. 3 to 4 times. That's how much more likely a poor reader is to drop out of high school. It draws a straight, brutal line from a reading problem in elementary school to a life-changing event a decade later. The stakes just could not be higher.
And the source report puts it in a really powerful, honestly kind of chilling way. They say that not being able to read proficiently is like having a permanent, acquired learning disability. It just builds a wall between you and information, between you and new skills, between you and being able to fully participate in society for the rest of your life.
So, with stakes this high, the analysis doesn't just leave us with the problem. It ends with an urgent call to action. It frames fixing this as a moral issue, an economic issue, and a civil rights issue.
So what do? The report lays out some really clear, big picture steps. First, mandate the science of reading in every school. Make sure funding is equitable so all schools have the resources and training they need. Actively confront bias and raise the bar for every single student. Demand accountability from districts for their reading scores. And, most of all, focus like a laser on early, intensive help before that gap has a chance to grow.
And that really leaves us with one final big question. The report makes the case that literacy isn't a privilege, it's a fundamental civil right. So, if learning to read is a right, whose job is it to protect it? Is it the schools, the government, the community? It's a question that really challenges all of us to think about our role in fixing this crisis. Thanks for joining this Explainer.